All right, everyone. So yesterday we got some massive news, the official XRP ETF launch announcement. And honestly, this was huge for XRP, like genuinely incredible stuff happening here. But here's the thing, if you're looking at the price chart right now, you're probably scratching your head thinking, wait, what? This doesn't look successful at all. And I get it, I totally get it. But we need to talk about something really important here, because I think a lot of people in this space just don't understand how crypto markets actually work. See, most people are thinking about this like the stock market. You know how it goes with stocks, right? Company announces a big partnership, drops a killer quarterly report, stock price goes up. Makes perfect sense. But crypto? Completely different game, my friends. Completely different rules. In crypto, everything, and I mean everything, follows Bitcoin's lead, especially when Bitcoin dominance is sitting as high as it is right now. That's just how this market operates. So does this mean the ETF launch was a failure? Absolutely not. Does this mean XRP is somehow broken or problematic? Not even close. The reality is pretty simple, and I'm going to give it to you straight because that's what you deserve. This market has been rough, really rough. We're talking over 10 months of challenging conditions here. That's the real story, and that's what we need to understand before we dive deeper into what this all means. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right for XRP. And honestly, I understand why you'd think that. XRP does march to its own beat sometimes. But here's the thing, if you go back and look at the charts, XRP actually hit a fresh high back in July. Yeah, July. While everything else was struggling, XRP was quietly making moves and reaching new peaks. So even though XRP has its own unique patterns and tends to surprise us, it's still not immune to these broader market forces we're dealing with right now. But when we stack XRP up against other established cryptocurrencies, the picture becomes really interesting. Let me show you what I mean here. Take Hedera, for example. Let's pull up HBAR and see what's happening. Actually, looks like we've got wrapped HBAR here, but that's totally fine. It'll give us the same comparison we need to understand what's really going on in the market. Here's what really catches my attention. HBAR hasn't touched a new high since way back in January. We're talking almost a full year here, people. And here's the kicker. Almost every single established cryptocurrency is stuck in this exact same situation. They're all sitting in this holding pattern where they've basically been stuck in neutral for over 10 months now. It's pretty wild when you think about it. So yeah, most of the market is just in a tough spot right now. And on top of that, we're seeing some serious selling pressure across the board, which we'll definitely dive into in a minute. But before we get there, I want to break down a few key things with you. Let's kick things off by talking about that ETF, because despite what the price action might be telling you, this was actually a really solid ETF launch. And then we got that exciting moment when Brad Garlinghouse jumped in and said, "It's finally happening." He was actually quoting Eric Balchunas, who is the senior ETF analyst over at Bloomberg. And get this, he posted some absolutely incredible numbers. XRPC hit $26 million in volume in just the first 30 minutes. That's insane. Eric even said, wow, going to blow away my $17 million guess, has a good shot at beating BSOL's $57 million as the biggest day one of any launch this year. Now, I had predicted around $20 million myself, and honestly, this thing completely smashed right through my expectations. It's always exciting when the numbers exceed what we thought was possible. But here's what makes this even more interesting. We've got so many more ETFs lined up to launch this year. So this is just the beginning of what could be a really exciting period. We're definitely keeping our eyes on all of this as it unfolds. So let's talk numbers, and these are pretty mind-blowing. According to the latest update from Canary today, they're now holding 108.7 million XRP. We're talking over $250 million in value here, people. This ETF has been absolutely crushing it. But here's where it gets really exciting. Most of the other issuers out there are literally 10 times bigger than Canary Capital. Let that sink in for a second. If we're seeing this level of money flowing into a smaller player like Canary, just imagine what's going to happen when Bitwise jumps in. Picture what Franklin Templeton could bring to the table. And here's the real kicker. We haven't even seen the heavyweight champions enter the ring yet. I'm talking about BlackRock, Fidelity, and all those Wall Street powerhouses. When they decide to launch their XRP ETFs, and it's really a matter of when, not if, the amount of institutional money that could flood into these products is going to be absolutely staggering. That's exactly why I'm so bullish on how successful this ETF launch really was. Now, I know a lot of people are looking at the price action and thinking, this doesn't look successful at all, and I totally get that perspective. We'll definitely address that concern. So let's talk numbers, and these are pretty mind-blowing. According to the latest update from Canary today, they're now holding 108.7 million XRP. We're talking over $250 million in value here, people. This ETF has been absolutely crushing it. But here's where it gets really exciting. Most of the other issuers out there are literally 10 times bigger than Canary Capital. Let that sink in for a second. If we're seeing this level of money flowing into a smaller player like Canary, just imagine what's going to happen when Bitwise jumps in. Picture what Franklin Templeton could bring to the table. And here's the real kicker. We haven't even seen the heavyweight champions enter the ring yet. I'm talking about BlackRock, Fidelity, and all those Wall Street powerhouses. When they decide to launch their XRP ETFs, and it's really a matter of when, not if, the amount of institutional money that could flood into these products is going to be absolutely staggering. That's exactly why I'm so bullish on how successful this ETF launch really was. Now, I know a lot of people are looking at the price action and thinking, this doesn't look successful at all, and I totally get that perspective. We'll definitely address that concern. I think so many people are missing the bigger picture here just because they're laser focused on that price chart. And listen, I totally understand why. The price action right now, yeah, it's rough. The whole market feels pretty brutal at the moment. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But here's what I really want you to think about. Price action isn't the only metric that matters. There's so much more happening behind the scenes that tells a completely different story. When we step back and look at a few key indicators, we can actually come to a pretty amazing conclusion. That with this launch being so successful, every major financial institution is probably sitting in boardrooms right now saying, okay, we need to get our own XRP ETF launched ASAP. And that makes perfect sense, right? This launch just proved there's massive demand out there. Plus, it's showing everyone just how significant XRP really is when you compare it to the ETF giants, Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now, with all that said, let's dive into the elephant in the room. Why didn't XRP absolutely explode in price even though we just got our very first official 100% spot-based ETF? And a wildly successful one at that. I actually posted some pretty funny thoughts about this on Twitter. This takes me back to something really interesting. And look, I'm not trying to put on a tinfoil hat here, but there's a pattern worth talking about. If we rewind all the way back to 2020, altcoin season was literally just starting to kick off right when XRP got delisted from every major exchange and the SEC lawsuit dropped. The timing was, let's just say, really coincidental. I find it fascinating how these events seem to line up, but let me get to the real reason why established cryptocurrencies, and XRP specifically, haven't gone absolutely ballistic despite all this positive news. It's actually pretty straightforward. Bitcoin is basically acting like a massive weight holding everything else down right now. When Bitcoin dominance is this high and Bitcoin isn't pumping, it creates this ceiling that prevents altcoins from breaking free and doing their own thing. What's absolutely wild about all this is just how much the entire market has taken a hit. Bitcoin dropped back under that psychological 100K level, which nobody saw coming just a few weeks ago. The total crypto market cap, it fell from nearly $4 trillion all the way down to around $2 trillion. That's a massive pullback, people. And if you check the Fear and Greed Index on CoinMarketCap, we're sitting at about 22, which puts us firmly in extreme fear territory. That tells you everything you need to know about the current market sentiment. This is the entire crypto market in terms of fear. But looking at the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index, actually, looking at this more closely, we're sitting at 16. That's deep in extreme fear territory. And it's not just crypto either. The stock market is also flashing those same extreme fear signals right now. So what we're dealing with is this wave of extreme fear washing over both traditional markets and crypto at the same time. It's like a perfect storm of pessimism hitting everything at once. What's really telling is that most fear and greed indicators have dropped back down to those April levels we saw earlier this year. And if you remember what happened in April, that actually marked the local bottom before we saw some serious market recovery. This is screaming to us that market sentiment has hit rock bottom. We're talking peak negativity here. People are genuinely scared, and that fear is driving everything right now. So when we circle back to our ETF discussion and ask the big question, was this a failure because XRP didn't pump? The answer is absolutely not. In fact, this was one of the most successful crypto ETF launches we've seen all year. What's really telling is that most fear and greed indicators have dropped back down to those April levels we saw earlier this year. And if you remember what happened in April, that actually marked the local bottom before we saw some serious market recovery. This is screaming to us that market sentiment has hit rock bottom. We're talking peak negativity here. People are genuinely scared, and that fear is driving everything right now. So when we circle back to our ETF discussion and ask the big question, was this a failure because XRP didn't pump? The answer is absolutely not. In fact, this was one of the most successful crypto ETF launches we've seen all year. Because when institutions look at XRP, they're seeing some pretty incredible numbers. Let's say we had roughly $100 million in ETF inflows. That's huge, right? But here's where it gets really interesting. Look at XRP's 24-hour trading volume right now. We're talking $8.29 billion. That's massive buying and selling activity happening every single day. And despite all that volume, $8.29 billion worth of trading in just 24 hours, look what the price chart actually shows us. It's barely moving. Keep in mind, we're dealing with a cryptocurrency that has a market cap of almost $40 billion. So when you put these numbers together, look, I'm not saying you need billions and billions of dollars to move XRP's price. That's not what I'm getting at here. What I am saying is that even with $58 million, or even that impressive $250 million in ETF holdings, it's just not enough volume to drastically shake up a $40 billion market cap. And here's the second big factor. The overall market is still in this choppy, uncertain phase. Bitcoin keeps selling off, and when Bitcoin sneezes, the rest of the market catches a cold. That's exactly what we're seeing right now. Bitcoin actually hit a low of $94,600 today. Now, did we see this coming? Well, if you've been following our chart analysis, I've actually been talking about this exact scenario over the past few days. I mentioned that Bitcoin was sitting right on the edge of losing one of its most important uptrend lines. And I warned that if we didn't see some strong upward momentum soon, Bitcoin could easily drop back down to test that deep $90,000 region and drag everything else down with it. I posted that analysis yesterday at 12:12 p.m. And since then, well, we've seen exactly what I was worried about happen. The selling has been intense. And once Bitcoin lost that crucial 100K level, it was like a signal flare that we were headed lower. I'm really hoping we can climb back above that weekly trend line because it's still... we're just going to be watching this very, very closely. All right, let me bring this all together for you with a clear bottom line. Is XRP's ETF a failure? Is XRP itself a failure? The answer is a resounding no. This ETF launch ranks as one of the most successful we've witnessed in all of 2025, and that's out of roughly 900 different ETF launches this year. When you put it in that context, it's actually pretty amazing. And here's another key point. If we take a step back and look at XRP's journey since November of last year, it's still up 365%. It did hit a high recently. We were up 643%. XRP is still doing very well even with this market sell-off. Now, should this market sell-off have us worried? Should we be hitting the panic button right now? Not necessarily. Here's the thing. We've seen this movie before. These types of sell-offs often happen right before we get our next major rally. Now, I'm not saying this time is guaranteed to be exactly the same. Markets can always surprise us, and each situation has its own unique factors. But I wouldn't start panicking just yet. The fundamentals are still strong, and remember, this ETF launch was an absolute success story. The reality is, we're not seeing XRP break free and do its own thing while Bitcoin just sits there doing whatever. That's not how this market works right now. Bitcoin is still the major force driving everything in this space. It's literally the puppeteer pulling all the strings, which is exactly why I keep telling everyone to focus on Bitcoin dominance, right? Because this thing has been sitting at around 60% for way too long. I know CoinMarketCap might show slightly different numbers, but the bottom line is we haven't seen altcoins break free at all. Think about it logically. Back in January 2021, when Bitcoin dominance really started dropping, that's when we saw altcoins absolutely explode. The market dynamics completely shifted, and that's when established cryptocurrencies had their moment to shine. But so far, we haven't witnessed altcoins gain any real dominance in this market cycle. And until that changes, most established coins are going to stay pretty flat, boring, or even move negatively. That reality affects spot prices no matter how amazing an ETF launch might be. Here's the silver lining though. This ETF launch just gave us rock-solid proof of concept data. Other institutional players and ETF issuers are looking at these numbers and thinking, okay, we absolutely need to get our own XRP ETF launched. So my prediction? We're going to see a wave of new XRP ETF applications coming down the pipeline, all because this initial launch proved there's massive demand out there. That's a wrap on today's analysis. If this breakdown helped clarify what's really happening behind the scenes, smash that like button and hit subscribe with notifications on. There's plenty more market insights coming your way. You can also follow me on